I am from Orinda, California. So, for anyone not familiar with the Bay Area, it's east of San Francisco by about 45 minutes. So, grew up there. So, kind of a Bay Area native and spent a fair amount of time in San Francisco proper. I went to UCLA, so I spent 4 years in Los Angeles, which I loved, and then moved back up to the Bay Area. So I've never lived outside of California.
Not
Nice.
yet.
Californian through and through.
So, Orinda is, people might not know, but it's a fairly suburban kind of setting, a lot of nature and things like this.
Mhm.
You go
Crazy
down
roads
crazy
to
roads.
get to the houses. I
Yeah,
mean, this is you have to have some driving skills to live there, I feel like.
it's actually very scenic. Although if you get car sick, that's not great. But that's the case. And you go down to UCLA for school. And what did you study?
I studied mass communications, so not related to what I'm doing necessarily. So I went in under what did I go in under? World Arts and Cultures major originally. And I spent about a year and a half in that.
Hmm.
And then I pivoted and changed majors to mass communications. I thought for most of college that I wanted to go into broadcast journalism. And UCLA does not have broadcast journalism or journalism as a major. So this was the next best thing. Stuck with that until I did an internship senior year. I think it was fall of my senior year at UCLA at KABC in Los Angeles, and I severely disliked it. So
Wait, what happened?
I was studying, at the time, I was doing an honors thesis in violence in the media and its effects on people's perception of their own personal safety.
Wow.
And then I spent my Fridays at KABC editing footage of like muggings and fires and car accidents and shootings. And I was like, oh, I'm doing this job would be sort of contributing to that part of the culture, right? Of sort of exploiting the scarier, more dangerous aspects of life, and maybe that's not a positive thing. So it made me
Interesting.
change my mind about my career path. And then I spent a little bit of time sort of whacking in the weeds, unsure what I wanted to do. I took the LSAT and considered law school. My parents heavily discouraged it for whatever reason, though I think I would have made a great lawyer. So I did not go, and instead I kind of ended up in an investment bank, actually, as my first job outside of college.
Wow. So, okay, you had a bunch of different
Oh my
things going
goodness,
on. When after the first year in the culture, the arts, or whatever study that was that you mentioned, and you wanted to do something in broadcasting, were you thinking that you would a broadcast journalist is what you said? So
Exactly,
does
like a
that
news anchor.
like a news
Thought I would
anchor,
be
like a
a news
person in front of
anchor.
the camera with a microphone and all that stuff?
Exactly.
Somehow I could see that. I feel like
Well, I mean, yeah, I think you would have been great at it. But so what made you want to do that when you like were you a kid and you're like, I want to be on TV, holding a microphone and like presenting the news? Like what kind of triggered it?
Yeah, I know it's funny. You know how it is when you look back at your childhood, and I don't know what you both, if you always wanted to be architects, but if you look back on your childhood and kids want to be, astronauts or ballerinas or open heart surgeons, and then eventually the reality of those jobs sets in, and it's maybe not. I think, yeah, I think I was attracted to maybe being on television. I liked the news growing up as a kid. We always discussed the daily news around our dinner table. So it was always kind of a topic in our household, and I was always aware of what was going on in the broader world. I think I saw it as a job that had an intersection of being, kind of public facing, but also having a portion of informing the public and learning about the world and teaching other people about it. So I think that was my initial attraction.
interesting, very culturally engaged. But so then after you do have to edit all these horrific scenes and you decide this is not for me, you said you went into investment banking?
Correct. So ultimately, after graduating, I moved home to Orinda, penniless post-college student, and my parents were charging me rent.
Oh,
So
wow.
they were very serious about paying for college and cutting me off without a dime afterwards. They did it. They meant it.
Wow.
So I was paying them rent and desperately needed a job and desperately wanted to get out of my parents' house and live on my own. And I had been talking with a few friends about moving into San Francisco. And I looked, at the time at rent and what it was going to take to survive. And I wanted to work in advertising at that point. I thought, well, this is maybe a good intersection of creativity and management, and I was
Mhm.
thinking more on the management side of it.
Hmm.
I got an offer from one of the big ad firms in San Francisco, and to this day, I cannot remember now which one it was. There used to be quite a few of them here, and I know they were on the Embarcadero, but no longer there. They offered me, I think it was $19,000 for the first year. And so I went
Wow.
home to my parents and said, Yay, I got a job offer. It's to be an account, rep in an ad agency. 19,000 for the first year. They've told me if I do a good job, then prove myself, they'll give me a raise and it'll get much better after that, but I need help for the first year. And my parents said, no.
Okay, well, so that line of we're cutting you off after college, that was really a serious thing that they
Oh, they were
abided by.
serious.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, my mother said, I suggest you get a job doing whatever it is that you can do for the most amount of money that you can make. And I was like,
Okay.
I don't think you want me doing that. But
Wait, what did your parents do for a living?
my dad was an executive for most of his life for multiple companies.
Hmm.
He also had a chain of Chuck E. Cheese's at one point, if you remember
Oh
Chuck E.
wow.
Cheese restaurants.
Yeah,
He
sure.
owned a few of those in Kentucky and Ohio, but for most of his career, he was partnered with I would call him like a wealthy creative thinker who would come up with these great ideas for companies and found them. And then my dad would step in and run them. So that was kind of the bulk of his career when I was growing up. He was really like a president or CEO of kind of multiple small private companies.
Interesting.
So business minded, yeah. And my
Yes.
mom was a stay-at-home mother, so she did not work outside of the home until after my brother and I departed, and then she did some substitute teaching and some other things, but predominantly she was at home.
Gotcha. Well,
Yeah.
$19,000 a year, and unless unless somehow you were born in the early 1900s, I don't think is an adequate amount of money to survive in a big city.
Yeah, not in San Francisco, not even back then, certainly not now, and not then either.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after my mom saying, get a job doing whatever it is you can do for the most amount you can make, I remember calling my friends in despair, like, I have got to get out of my parents' house. I need a job. And one of my good friends from UCLA said, well, I just took a job at Hambrecht and Quist, and it's an entry level job. It's as a, basically an assistant, right? Planning travel and making pitch books and doing whatever needs to get done. They're paying me $38,000 a year. And it's so much fun. The guys are hot. I'm
Okay.
and I'm like just turned 21, right?
Oh
So I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
They're gonna pay me and there's cute guys. I'm in. So yeah, I literally within a week, I think had a job at Hambrecht and Quist and
Wow.
moved out to the city. And that was sort of my first job out of college, which I over the next I spent 3.5 years there or so. I eventually moved into recruiting for them and then left there to take a recruiting job at the Law and Economics Consulting Group.
Interesting. Did you like the work? Did you like working as a recruiter or for the recruiting company?
Not really.
But they were cute
I mean,
guys.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, Hambrecht and Quist, I loved the
Mm.
company. This was like the heyday of the small investment banks, right? So like Alex Brown, H&Q, super fun. I was on the trading floor when Netscape went public. There was just a
Wow.
lot of excitement, right? This is first .com boom. It's a whole new world opening up. And
Mm.
yes, it was full of very smart people. Even the assistants, honestly, were all hired out of UCLA, Berkeley, Davis, many of whom went on to become bankers or do other great things with their lives. So, they recruited well. They had a group of really smart people who worked really hard. We worked crazy hours. It was stay all night if you were asked to, do whatever
Mm.
you were asked, no whining, no complaining, so it definitely, I had a good work ethic already, but I think it helped teach me that too, that was just the expectation and everyone did it. And we worked together as a team. So I really liked it there. I moved into the recruiting more because I saw that as an opportunity to take a step out of the assistant role and into something with more meaning and more challenge and more interest. And I did do it for a few years there, then Law and Economics Consulting Group. And then I went from there to an internet startup where I really was the first hire by the three founders and recruited staff and outfitted the office and helped run the books and was just kind of like the functional right hand for
Yeah.
the three
Mhm.
founders. So I learned a lot from that too. In the end, going through those three jobs, though none were the perfect fit for me, they definitely gave me some good skills that have helped me run my own business since then.
Yeah, for sure. So, obviously now you have a design company. Do you ever think about like what would have happened if you had just stayed at one of these other businesses?
No, I can't imagine. That was never going to happen.
That was never going to happen. Okay, so then how did this transition from all these different types of businesses and works that you did? How did you go from that to then doing interior design and then starting your own interior design company, which is now very successful? Like that seems to be quite a leap for a lot of people. It's not like you knew that you were going to do interior design from a young age, or maybe that was the case, but you didn't do undergrad. It wasn't like the normal track necessarily. So what was that transition like?
So once the internet startup where I was there for about a year, and they started to implode, just as many of them do, run out of money. They were a little, I think, early to the game in terms of what they were trying to do. So they didn't make it. My husband was very kind and let me take a year off to just sort of think about what I wanted to do, because I think he and I both knew I had ended up in this just from this circuitous route of just needing to have a job and, not really being my passion or what I really wanted to do with my life. So he kindly said, take some time off, think about what you want to do. And in thinking about that, I really kind of went back to childhood and tried to think about what did I enjoy doing as a child, what interested me. And I had always been fascinated with architecture. I used to steal my mom's architectural digests and look through them. She had them in the house. I don't think I ever saw her look at them. Maybe she did, but I definitely did. And I used to draw houses as a kid. Like, I think other girls would draw like dresses or horses or whatever. I was drawing houses. So I briefly considered, believe it or not, going back to architecture school.
Wow.
And funny enough, at the time, I think I was 27, and I had this attitude like, oh, I am way too old to go back to college for an architecture degree, right? Which now is hilarious. And, I'm like, oh, that was silly. But at the time I thought, oh, I'm too old for that. I can't go back to college for an architecture degree. I'll go for an interior design degree. And UC Berkeley Extension had a program that was a great fit because it was nights and weekends aimed at adults, working professionals, people of different backgrounds. So I attended UC Berkeley Extension's design program, and while I was there, got my first job at a company called Studio 104, so a small kind of one-woman firm here in San Francisco. Madeline was kind enough to take me on, even though I was very green, because I knew how to run QuickBooks. And she was not into doing the finance side of the job, but because of the positions I had had prior, I definitely understood how to run the books. And in exchange for that, she let me follow her around, and I learned a lot. So it was nice to have some boots on the ground experience alongside my classes.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to hear more about the program at Berkeley. So how long was it? How large were the classes? Were most of the students older, like you said, or was it a mixed bag of people?
Real mixed bag. I would say there was everything from probably early 20s to people in their 50s, making a career pivot. So really wide swath, taught by local architects and designers. And in fact, some of my designer friends now teach there because many of them attended that program, including, I'm sure you've heard of Jay Jeffers. He went there. I believe Dina Bandman did. She's definitely teaching there. So, there's, quite a history, I would say, of Bay Area people in the industry kind of supporting the program and teaching there. I had some great teachers. I loved I believe her name was Vesta Kirby, who taught color theory, which was my hands down favorite class while I was there. I also got to dabble. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Why was it your favorite class?
Partly it's the instructor. I think like any class you take, having someone who's passionate about what they teach and well-informed about it makes all the difference. But I love color, and I think just learning about the psychology of color and which colors work together, and the color studies that we were able to do, and everything from watercolor to construction paper to fabrics and hard materials. I just loved it. I think it was very tactile too with the materials that we got to work with. I also loved model building. I know people talk about hating that in school, like their misery of being up till 3 a.m. with the razor blade and the foam core. I really loved building models. So I think for me, anything that was like hands-on and tactile was, really engaged me.
Interesting. Somehow I have this suspicion that you would have made a great architect as well, or you would have enjoyed architecture school for sure.
It's never too late to go back to architecture school.
I think I would have. It's funny. I also think I had this perception, which true or not, you two can tell me, that there was maybe too much math for me. I think I had this perception like, oh God, there's all this engineering and there's going to be this super complex math and I'm not awesome at math and I would not be good at that. So I think I had these fears like there were parts of it that I wouldn't be good at. But yeah, I think in a way I'm sort of a stymied architect. Like I really do love and admire the work of great architects like you two.
Well, to answer the question, well, it's very nice of you to say. To answer the question about math, I will say that at least in high school and in college, I was decent at math and calculus and all that stuff. I can also say very confidently that has not directly helped me as an architect whatsoever.
And I was not good at math.
I did not make it to calculus, so that tells you something about me. I don't think I went past like algebra 2 or geometry or I don't know, whatever. That's where I tapped out.
That's fair. That's fair because calculating the surface of like a rhombus or a football or a donut is not really.
It's very helpful really on the day-to-day life,
Not super helpful, right?
But, just real quickly, it is an interesting thing. A lot of people, including yourself, have this perception that to be an architect, you must be good at engineering, or that's what architects do. But that's typically very far from the case. Like, we don't handle the engineering. We have a kind of instinctive sense for what will work and not work, but we don't do the calculations. We don't figure out the size of the beams or do the structural portion, do the design of the structural portion of the building.
I think it's more having a rational mind in the way you think about, the architecture. And like you said, like having it's not a feeling, but it's kind of like understanding the laws of physics, and like when things cantilever out, like how far do you think it can cantilever before it's going to break? We don't calculate those things. It's more like kind of having a rough idea.
Yeah. So
right. And I'm sure some of that's experience too, right? Like school and experience over time of learning what actually can be built and designing to that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too. Was there anything about that Berkeley education process that was a surprise to you that was different than what you anticipated or was particularly challenging?
I remember at the time my main frustration was they didn't get into any kind of 3D software. So then I don't know how the program has changed since, but we did a lot of hand drafting, which I loved. And then moved into CAD, which I also loved. And I really wanted to learn 3D, but at that time, that was not part of their curriculum. Now, granted, that's pre-Revit, and there's so many new programs anyway that didn't even exist back then. But there was no 3D software instruction at that time. And I find the difference now is everyone I hire coming out of design school knows 3D software. Some of them can't hand draft, but they can draft in 3D software. Yeah.
No, I think that's the case. So when I was in school, at least the particular school that I went to for undergrad, it was sort of a transition, not sort of, it was a transition period. So the first 3 years were complete. Yeah, years 1 and 2 were almost completely done by hand. And then we were switching over to using 3D softwares. But it is very strange. Like, I'm very grateful that was the timing for me because it kind of gave me the ability to see a little bit of both sides. Like we had to do rapidographics on vellum and what do you call it? The other material, which is Mylar, which is like totally ridiculous. But it is an odd thing that now most students, when they graduate, at best, they can do a really crappy sketch of what they're thinking, like if that. And a lot of times they can't. And it's like, I need to use Rhinoceros or SketchUp or whatever the program is to think.
But even the models, now everything's 3D printed or CNC.
No one's
kids don't know how to glue model and I can cut pieces of cardboard anymore, which I feel like it's always good to have a kind of a backup tool set you can go to. Like if your computer crashes, you're still able to, move your project along and think, or if you're stuck within your 3D model, just go back to a piece of paper and freely kind of explore options.
Yeah, I agree, particularly on a job site. And I'm sure you see this too, but I mean, literally 2 or 3 times within the last few weeks, I've been on an active job site and we've been working out detailing for something. In this case, it was like a very complex marble layout for a kitchen we're working on, and being able to stand there with the contractor and the marble installer and sketch, a section of what I'm looking for is crucial, right? But I agree, a lot of the students I'm seeing come out of school can't do it. Even just sort of rudimentary hand sketches can't do it. I also feel like our education was pretty practical, like in terms of how things get made. And I'm often very surprised by the students that we hire straight out of design school sometimes actually don't know how a cabinet is made. So when they draw something, they will draw things where it's like, no, you can't actually put the door right up against the wall. Like that doesn't work. Like we need a filler strip, and there's a hinge. By the way, there's a handle, and you don't want the handle to hit the door either. Just practical things, I guess, about how things are built that they just don't get. There's so much emphasis, I feel like now, on the computer skills and maybe not enough on the reality of what building is actually like.
That's a super good point. And not to go too far into the rabbit hole of education, but I've always had this kind of theory that as more programs get introduced and as they become more complicated and students are required to learn them and professionals are, well, there's only so much time in the day. And even if you're a student or professional who stays up and you work 14 hours a day, you're still limited. So if all these new things you have to learn are introduced, then time is being taken away from something. I don't know what that other thing is. Maybe it is design, maybe it's color theory, maybe it's the constructability of thing, who knows, whatever it is, but something's being taken away. And I think it's really, I don't envy being the students now because I think it's very difficult to try and learn, let's say on the extreme Revit, for example, or ArchiCAD or a BIM program while also learning the things that you're describing, because it's brutal. It's hard. These softwares are not easy to learn if you are starting from scratch in particular.
I agree. And I feel like so many of the programs seem to be aiming the students towards going to a giant firm like a Gensler, right? Where they're going to sit in a cubicle and do nothing but draft all day long. Fine, if that's what you want to do and that makes you happy, that's great, right? But for a small residential firm like us, I'm looking for people who can wear every hat, and do I expect them to have all of those skills coming out of school? No, but the broader the skills, the better, right? So understanding critical path, construction, understanding what goes into a set, being able to hand sketch a detail when needed, having an understanding of materials and what's appropriate for a certain situation, having some sense of fabrics and what's appropriate and how things are made and durability. I'm kind of amazed with sometimes the lack of practical knowledge coming out of design school, so it is what it is, and I'll take people on because they're smart and they want to learn and they have, the base level skills, and then I'm willing to teach them the rest. And they certainly learn a ton because we put them on job sites right away, and they, follow me around or the seniors around, and we try to make sure they're really exposed to all aspects of the business. But I do feel like I wish the schools would have a little bit more practical knowledge involved. And the other thing I see missing, and again, I'm going down the rabbit hole here, but is the, business side of design.
Oh, gosh,
they don't seem to teach anywhere.
Yeah.
Nobody does, right?
Agreed.
But if you want to establish your own firm, even if you've worked for someone else, maybe you pick up some little bits and pieces here and there. But I do think design schools could do a better job of at least offering, I don't know, one class, one semester of what is the business of the industry? How does the industry work?
I completely agree. And I think, when you graduate from school and let's say you went straight from high school to undergrad and you finished and you're probably like 22, 23, or maybe even a little bit older, it's likely you're not going to start your own office right after you graduate. But I do think that just embedding the kind of meta information about the business side of our industries from an earlier age in one's career just makes sense and would probably have, actually, now that I think about it, a long-term and greater effects like across the board for these professions, which is something I think historically that both the interior design and architecture offices have struggled with and not been great at. And we've always talked, especially for architecture, we always talk about how to solve these problems. And I think probably one of the solutions is what you said, which is, well, just at least introduce these things sooner.
Because
it is ultimately a business, right? It's creative, but it is ultimately a business.
And you can rely just on experience to gain those skills. I mean, like you said, if you go work for a giant company, the business side you're never going to see because there is a whole team dedicated to that. You're never going to be exposed. And if you work for a small company, you're probably going to be exposed, but it's most likely not going to be the right way to run a business, to be honest.
Well, you learn what not to do. That's
but
Yes, and I think even for staff in a smaller firm like mine, and we're 12, right? So we're not a big firm, but understanding why are billable hours important,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Why does it
Yeah.
matter that you hit, we have billable targets in our company. Our billable target is 85%. Why do I expect you to hit that? Because that's the number that we need to make this company work.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's hard if people come into it with nothing but this idea of like this fluffy fantasy world of like designing lovely things. That's great. That's certainly part of it. But you are also, even if you are not the owner of the business, you are part of a business, and understanding that it is a business and how the business works and why aspects of this are important. It also dovetails with understanding budgets, right? Clients' budgets,
Mm.
construction budgets, and again, I find they have very little exposure to that side at all, of the industry.
So for new hires, or let's say the junior staff level people in your office, is it your approach to have them understand all these things because it dovetails?
We definitely talk about it. So when we talk about billable targets, I explain why, right? That's
Mm.
85% is not a random number. It's actually like a pretty well proven number across multiple billable industries that staff needs to hit in order to make profitability. So, we do talk about the why behind the expectations for sure. And I do try to educate along the way, right, about why these things matter. Why do our initial budgets for our clients for our time matter, and why do we work to stick to those? Why does it matter that when we're on a construction project and we've been given allowances by the contractor, why is it important that we select within those allowances? So, it's hard, right? Because it's hard sometimes, I think, for designers not to say, oh, well, I was supposed to pick the $25 tile, but then I saw this $50 tile and it's so much prettier. Well, it is, it's
Of
not in
course
the budget.
it is.
Yeah.
Of course it's prettier. Yeah.
That's interesting. I remember when I graduated from school, I was definitely the type of person who was just obsessed with the creative or design aspects of things and had no clue about the business aspects, and was frankly not very interested in it. And of course, when you're a smaller office, you cannot do that. I mean, you won't succeed at all if you approach it that way. And a lot of my working experiences when I worked at other offices, a lot of the employees were quite siloed from a lot of these kinds of parts of the business and the conversations. Yeah. And I had never fully understood it, in particular for the boutique size practices, because it seemed to me that even if you're just a draftsperson or a person that's in charge of procurement or whatever it might be, that having some just base understanding, like you said, of why these things were important and why the boss is always thinking about these things would be vital. Because when you're a small ship, everyone matters. And it's kind of like, well, if the business doesn't succeed, then you ain't going to exist at this business.
Exactly.
We're
right.
together. It's not a Gensler where Gensler will continue whether or not I'm here or not, or whether or not I, keep track of these things. And in a small case, it's not like that.
Right, exactly. So we all succeed together, we all fail together, right? And I'm very cognizant that yes, I'm steering the ship, I'm the rainmaker, I'm responsible for bringing that in, but making the business work is something that everyone here has a hand in. And so I think for employees, the understanding of the why something is important, whether it's billable time or whether it's something else, meeting a construction schedule, sort of, it's easier to get people to perform if they understand why they're doing it.
Yeah.
So going back real quick to the Berkeley education experience, in that program, were you guys you learning how to make cabinets or learning how upholstery is done? How does that part of the education happen?
Mm-hmm. I mean, again, I can't speak to what they're doing now,
Sure.
But in our day, yes, we did visit a cabinet shop. We did visit upholsterers. We visited the design center. So there was some hands-on aspect to the business. And in fact, I actually didn't make it to the end of the program. I didn't mention that, but I dropped out without finishing.
What?
Yes. So after Studio 104, so I was there for a while I was at Berkeley. I bought my first house with my husband in Marin County and remodeled it. And then friends started coming over and saying, your kitchen looks amazing. Your bathrooms are amazing. This looks amazing. Can you help me with my kitchen? Can you help me with my bathroom? Pretty soon I had a bunch of work and it hit the point where I could not go to school and work,
Hmm.
just given the volume that was going on. So I kind of felt like, well, I've had all the hand drafting, I've had the CAD drafting, I've had the color theory, I've had the presentations. I'm 2/3 of the way through this program. I'm just going to drop out basically and start working. So that's what I did. I wouldn't necessarily advise it. And in fact, funny enough, now I would never hire someone who dropped out of it. I mean, unless they prove themselves somewhere else, fine. Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
but I did drop out and established my own firm in 2002. And I really just learned the rest of it by doing it, either on my own house or clients' houses where I was just very engaged because it was just me and I was small. So I drew everything. I was on the
Mhm.
job site constantly, involved in every detail. So yeah, sorry to segue off that, but yeah, so Berkeley, we did have some practical hands-on exposure, which helped a lot. And then I learned a lot by doing.
Was there ever a part of you, I doubt now because again, you're doing very well, but maybe in the early days where you thought to yourself, maybe I should have stayed around for that last third?
No.
Too busy, I'm guessing.
Nothing against Berkeley, but
Yeah, yeah.
no, I mean, it was just kind of, I got work and I kept getting work and I've been getting work ever since. So, and I feel like the skill I didn't have, I sort of taught myself, or I looked at other people's work, or I tried to figure out how to make things better. I think because I have this kind of mindset of curiosity and continual improvement that even now, after, I've been in this industry on my own for, February will be 22 years. I still learn new things all the time, and I'm always looking to optimize and get better at what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's something that also stood out when we first met about you, is you have that kind of intensity in the spirit with how you practice and how you approach. I think probably everything would be my guess. And so tied with that, I am also curious, you said your office is now 12 people or around there, right? Which is not huge, but is also not small. In my view, it's not small. I know for people in other industries, 12 is like micro, but
Right,
for
tiny,
design,
yeah.
it's not necessarily the case. But there's a big difference between an interior and design office that is, let's say, 2 or 3 people versus 12. Was there
Yes.
ever a moment in the past 20 or so years where you thought, I just want to stay at the size of myself and plus another and maybe someone to handle procurement, but I don't want to get beyond that because it gets into, a lot of other problems come with 12 people.
I mean, for us, it was kind of a natural growth progression of I chose to stay small for a long time because I also have 3 children who are now all teenagers. But for the early years, let's say the first decade that I had the company or more, I was either pregnant or nursing or toddlers and pregnant and nursing. So I was really juggling kids and work. And so it was really myself and one assistant for the first 8 years or so. So I really did that where, we only did 2 or 3 projects at a time. I drew absolutely everything. I picked everything. I ran every meeting. I was very hands-on. From there, we kind of jumped to 3 or 4 people and we stayed there for a while. And then it really took off when my son went to, school full time. And I kind of felt like, okay, now I really have the bandwidth. And what if I say yes instead of saying no? Where could this go? Right. And if I don't try it, I'll never know. So we've been growing ever since. And I feel like now we're at a good size. I would like to stop here for a little while and stabilize. I will say the plus side of getting larger is that say yes factor, right? Of like when
Yeah.
something exciting comes along. There were times over the years where I was just too small and I couldn't do it. There were bandwidth limits and I said no to things that I was sad about because I otherwise would have taken them. Now we generally, I'm not always, but we generally have the bandwidth to say yes. And we have the staff and the infrastructure to run much, much larger projects. So like we're doing a ground up in Dominican Republic that's very large. We're doing a large ground up in Sacramento, one in Incline, North Star. We sort of have multiple large projects, which is exciting because they're all different from one another. And that's kind of what keeps me engaged in this industry is the challenge and taking on different projects and for different clients and different styles, different geographies. And if we weren't the size we were, some of those I would have had to say no to. So for now, I'm happy with where we are.
Have you ever thought about venturing into other types of projects, types of buildings? So not just residences, but, and I know partly the answer, but like hotels, which would seem like a natural progression, and then restaurants or like other things, or offices even. I don't know.
I mean, I did my husband's venture office way back when, so I have dabbled in that a little bit. And we did do one multifamily development that's slated to start construction this summer. So we have done some, outside of the single family residence. I would love to do a boutique hotel. I think we'd be a great fit for it, particularly having done this multifamily luxury condo development, which kind of feels like doing a hotel. I think we definitely have the bandwidth and the knowledge to do it. And I have, over the last couple of years, purposefully hired staff that has experience on the commercial side of things. One of our staff members designed a couple of Four Seasons around the world. So we have the knowledge base now too. I think in years past, I might have been nervous about saying yes to that. Now we're working internationally. We have people that have done those kinds of projects. We're, I think, well set up for it. And I would love to do, small hospitality, restaurant. That would be fun. Yeah.
I feel like doing a hotel would actually be easier than multifamily.
Oh, I think so. It would.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I was wondering is, was there a clear point or project maybe in your career where you realized that you had a strong knack for this? Was there like a turning point where you said to yourself, this could be something, and not just I'm doing it as a hobby, but this could be something?
Gosh, I mean, the first project I had published was in 2007. And I did a kitchen for some friends of ours in Pacific Heights. I thought it was great. And this is, so early, and I'm so tiny that like I didn't have a PR person. This is before Instagram,
Yeah, good point.
And really all my work was, and still mostly is, word of mouth. And so I did this kitchen for some friends. They threw a party, and the editor of California Home and Design happened to come to the house for the party. And the next day I get a phone call from California Home and Design saying, hey, we'd love to publish this kitchen that you did. We were at this party. And so we ended up on the cover of California Home and Design. And I think it was like July of 2007. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe I am good at this. I mean, I guess I always figured I was competent, right?
Right.
But I was like, oh, this is like an outside person who, is ostensibly an expert at design, who thinks that I've done a good job. So that was really helpful, and I guess reinforced for me that, that I was, by maybe some people's outside measures, good at what I was doing. That's
interesting though, like the psychology of that, because on the one hand, I think it's easy for people to say, and it is partially true, that things like publications and awards don't really mean a whole lot. But I would say subjectively, if you're a person who achieves any of those things, it actually does have a big impact on your outlook about yourself. At least for me. It's an odd thing.
It does. And I feel like also when you start your own practice and, you haven't worked for 20 years, or you work maybe for just a few years, you feel like you don't know everything, and you're kind of like, you're still building yourself. And you do get time to time, like the imposter syndrome. Like you're like, am I actually faking it until I make it, or I'm actually good at this? Like, it's hard to tell, right? Yeah. So for sure, when you see your work being published in a magazine that's, known among like being like presenting good work, then you're like, okay, well, this is a good sign. I'm actually not an imposter.
Yeah, I still get imposter syndrome from time to time, really? 20 plus years on. So.
I feel like that's the nature of the game, though. I mean, I feel like for every project that we do, even if on paper it would seem quite similar to the previous, like the stats of it, like it's a different site, it's a different client, it's a different criteria, and everyone it's kind of like I don't know how is this going to work out exactly.
No, and there is the design aspect of being an imposter, and then there is also like the business aspect, the social aspect of working with people, like making it work on all of the different levels for a project. Like maybe sometimes the design ended up great, but the relationship with the client got killed, and you can feel like you didn't really succeed.
Right, you didn't kill it on all fronts.
Yeah.
And it is a tough industry that way. I mean, I can't think of many others that are unique as this, and its challenges across so many facets, right? Especially if you own and run a firm. So the expectation that you are constantly creative, that you are bringing fresh new ideas, but also that you have to understand how to run a firm. So you have to have enough, sort of finance experience or know-how to make that work. And then managing the clients, which is a whole other talent, and interfacing with builders and colleagues, right? Like if architects and designers work together, how do we interface? How does that work? It just requires so many different diverse skills. It's not easy. It's not easy to succeed at all of those all of the time.
Yeah, for sure. When you started to bring on people and the office started to grow, what were some of the challenges with that? Because I've said many times on this show,
Right.
and I think it is true, that the skill set required to be a good designer and have, let's say, a one-person show and work with clients, select the right items, and all the stuff, that alone is just very difficult to do. But that is also very different from running an office that has 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 people in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Organizationally, I think, figuring out the right level of staffing, the right positions of staffing, kind of right sizing the firm for the work that you have, getting the blend of skills and talents with people. And maybe this is where, again, my recruiting background probably comes in handy. I have had these weird little experiences along the way in terms of like having to run the books for a startup, really helpful in understanding finance,
Yeah, sure.
I've been a recruiter. I kind of know what to look for in people, and I understand, how to recruit talent and the kind of mix of people that you need, and not just their skills, but also their personality. In any small office, if you have someone whose personality is unpleasant or divisive, it doesn't matter how talented they are as a designer, it's not going to work. We're small. So for us, when I'm looking for teammates to join us, I'm always looking for people that have the skills and the talent, and that also have a personality that's going to mesh with the firm, and that have the work ethic that I'm looking for.
That's interesting, because I feel like when it comes to hiring people, there's a list of very important criteria, which is almost just the baseline, like the skill set, like the interests, and all of these kinds of things. But assuming that's taken care of, and I think that the thing now is that there are potentially a lot of younger designers and architects who meet those criteria. Mm-hmm. Then the rest of like 60% of it afterwards is just whether or not they're going to be a good fit, which I know for people who are looking for jobs can be frustrating, because you could say to yourself, well, on paper, look, I've done all this work and I have even, let's say, an extra few years of experience than that person. Why wasn't I hired? And I think it's just, for better or for worse, it just comes down to whether or not the person interviewing you likes you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's that, likes you personally and is aware of who else is in the office, right?
Yeah.
And sort of those people, their personality, the needs that they have for their work environment. For me, it's not just whether I like them. I'm sort of looking at them as, how is this person going to mesh with our entire team? And is that going to work? And, we've had a few over the years where we've misfired, sure, over the last 20 years, a couple of times, where we've hired someone on paper, they're great, they interview well, and then they get in here and they're not great, for whatever reason, like personality, or they lack work ethic, or whatever it is. And I've learned over the years to also get swifter about when people don't work, kind of saying like, this doesn't work, let's part ways and move on, rather than trying to mold or shape somebody. You can teach the skills, but you're not going to change their personality. So that I've learned.
Oh, that's also super well put. I agree with it also. And I remember so many places I worked at, I'm like, clearly this person does not fit here. What are we doing?
And it's so important for the what people say, like office culture, right? It's very much of a chemical reaction, like whoever you put together in the same office, and how the energy is going to flow or not flow in the office. I've one of the office I worked at, I started, we were maybe like 40 people, and there was like a really great energy office culture. Everybody was just together, supportive, and we grew up to 90 something people. And at this scale, like, you're gonna get more pockets and groups of people rather than like one big entity, and you could kind of start seeing a bit more of the individual personalities coming out of the group, rather than like the cohesiveness of the group.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. It's super important.
I love visiting people's office. is, and I've been to your office, and I can say, at least from the time that I was there, it seems like all our people have good vibes around them.
Thank you. I think they do.
But it's a true thing. Sometimes I step into an office and the spider sense is tingling. I'm like, this is a weird place. I don't know what's going on here. Like after I leave, but something's off. It doesn't feel right. It's just purely instinctual, but I think there is something about it for sure. You can feel the energy and the buzz when people are clicking together.
And in our industry, right, we're creatives, so you have to have people that can sort of spark off one another, or toss around creative ideas, and do so respectfully. So that's kind of what I'm looking for is, that ability to speak your mind. And I do encourage everyone at every level in our firm. What I tell people is I don't really care about titles. Like, okay, everyone has one, but to me, it's like, if you have a great idea, I want you to say it. I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm the junior, or I'm the intern, and just sit there quietly. It's like, that's not what I'm paying you to do. I'm paying you for your ideas. So bring them to the table, and, everyone be respectful about everyone else's ideas. And, to me, it's kind of the best thing wins. So whoever brings it in, I'm happy to have it. And I try to cultivate that environment where people feel like they can be a team member and also bring their creativity out and shine.
So talking about your design process when you embark on a new project, let's say hypothetically you have this client who approaches you and says, I'm interested in using you to do the design and interior design of my home or hotel, let's say, or whatever it is. What is your guys' process to help the client and go through with them from, I don't know if we have to go from beginning to end, but what is the process like?
On the early end, usually we'll have them fill out a form. So over the years, I've developed a client questionnaire that is very helpful, kind of delves into everything from color and texture likes to how people live. Do they have collections of things? I find that it just helps cut to the chase on a lot of conversations about important things and things that, if you ask somebody sitting across a table, well, how do you feel about plaid? What's your favorite color? Sometimes they're sort of taken aback and they can't really answer it. But if you give them a questionnaire, most clients will come back with some really great stuff that just helps, right? It's like, I remember one of our clients came back and said, well, I hate the color yellow. And it was like, okay. Great. Good to know. We'll be avoiding that. So the questionnaire is great. If clients have a Pinterest board or if they've made their own mood boards, which I found 70% of the time when people come to us, they have at least some imagery they've collected in some way that expresses what they're after. That's incredibly helpful because I find trying to do that verbally is a challenge, So I've over the years learned, I've had clients come to me and say, oh, I'm modern. I'm really modern. I like modern things, and then I'll say, great, can you show me some pictures? And when they're showing me pictures, I'm going, well, that's not what I would call modern, right? I might call that transitional or, so the verbiage is difficult, particularly for people that aren't in the industry, right? They can use words for things that aren't correct. And so I find the images just cut through any confusion on using words to describe what someone's after. So I love getting visual imagery. So that's usually the basis from which we start. Obviously, if it's, new construction or remodeling and there's an architect that's already on board, meeting them and looking at their plans and having a conversation with them about the conversations they've had with the client. Sometimes they've been on 6 years, a year, or whatever before us, so they have a lot of background on kind of how they got where they are with the design. So I always want to understand from the architect, their relationship with the client, their understanding of what the client values, what they're going for stylistically, how the architect and I will work together, our firms will work best together is an important conversation early. And then certainly with clients from there, the next step usually for us is moving into kind of our version of the mood boards. And I like to start with a very kind of high level mood board that captures the vibe we're going for in the project. And that means that will there be furniture and fabrics on it? Yes. Do I often put on other things? Yes. Like I did one for our Beverly Hills project where, there were like cars and watches and, things like that. The guy was a watch collector and he was into cars and he had this very James Bondy vibe. So just to show him that I understood that and I understood, what he was going for, the initial mood boards were actually much more directional in terms of feel and not so specific in terms of furnishings. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we start. And then obviously it gets more granular from there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I like the observation, the statement about the confusion when we're just using words to describe design and architecture. It's not. It's impossible, really.
It could be style. It could also just be word, like, I want something bold, and then you show something bold, and the client is like, oh no, that's like too much. And I'm okay, well, bold means something, so visuals really help.
They do. I was wondering, with that part of the process, if you ever have the challenge, or you find it difficult to get clients not to be fixated on specific things. Because I think early in that process, for us, and then for you too, based on your description, it's not about, we're not selecting the final material in that first, mood board. We're just trying to understand, not even direction yet, maybe, but just understand who you are, to gauge your reaction to stuff. Is it ever difficult to get people to step away from Pinterest and not have them just always go back to, I want that thing that's on the wall?
Sometimes I find, which like the most frustrating thing I see is when their Pinterest is very scattered. So we do sometimes get people where they'll give us a link to a board and I'm like, whoa, these are not all in the same lane, right? There's like 3 different houses going on here. So I would say the biggest challenge I see is in that, where sometimes, well, I like this, but I like this, and I like this, and I like this. Well, great, and all those things individually might be fantastic. Do those things all belong together in the same space or even in the same house? No, And so sometimes I find explaining that to clients can be very difficult. Kind of like, I get that you like this, and they are both great. They do not belong together, right? So we have to kind of pick a lane. And what I like to say is like, pick a lane and stay in the lane.
Stay in the lane. That's very, very important to stay in the lane. We joke often kind of about that. It's similar in a way where one of the very common things that happens in the design process or projects is frustrating for a lot of architects and designers is it's usually when the client goes on a vacation or takes a brief kind of hiatus from the project, and you're laughing because you know it, that they see something cool, which is great, but they come back and they say, let's do this instead, or let's throw this into the mix, and which can be very productive and produce very, very interesting results. But for the architects we speak with, a lot of times they're like, oh, what are you talking about? This is not related to, the last year and a half that we've been building up on.
I have definitely seen it happen. The most extreme example was, and I know these clients will know who they are, and they will not mind my saying this, that we spent a year with an architect figuring out how to remodel an existing home that they bought that was Spanish style. And it was big and great lot and all that, but not a great house. And so we were really going to sort of morph it into something like cool and Moroccan vibes and modernize it to the degree possible. And the clients at one point said, we need to take a break. We're going to travel this summer. We'll come back and sort of, pick this up. But we had really gotten, I would say all the way towards a permit set. They came back and they were like, you know what? We don't want that anymore. We want glass walled and concrete. And so in the end, we tore it down. We took all the plans and just wadded them up and threw them out and just started over entirely. Yeah. And the end result was awesome. And it was definitely the right choice. The less extreme examples, certainly I have seen people come back from vacation like, I fell in love with southern Spain and now I want a tile roof. And you're like, ooh, that's not what we're building here. I feel like it's worse for the architects, right? Like for me, I can sometimes pivot people to like, I get that you love that. Great. I'm happy to buy like a Spanish antique chest that we can put in this bedroom, right? That you get a little bit of that vibe, and then we'll put an antique mirror over here and it works. I think it's much harder for you all because you're talking about things that are far more permanent and I would argue far more important, right? So having someone who then tries to shoehorn in architectural details that do not work with the style of the house would be much more upsetting than like trying to force me to use some kind of pattern or, some piece of furniture that I don't love. I can usually get away with kind of like, I hear you and I understand that you want this vibe or you're now in love with this color and okay, we'll find a way to get it in there in a way that's appropriate, but it's probably a little less hard for me than it is for you when that happens.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree, but that makes me think that there's a very interesting difference generally between the interior design portions versus, let's say, the architecture, where I think you got interior designers and designers have generally more freedom to introduce a greater variety of things into one space, which makes it very, very interesting. Like, I'm very intrigued by this idea that you would mix something very old and very new, and they don't match each other, but they're complementary, and they just work. Versus, I think in the case of a lot of architecture, it's that definitely does happen for sure. But I think it's harder to do, and I don't think we have nearly. I know we don't have nearly as much flexibility because, I know we just don't. Everything locks into place, and either it locks into place or it doesn't. It's very, at least in my view, it's very, very black and white.
It's very it's very hard. So we worked on a project once, and I think the client was too excited about his project, which sometimes could be detrimental to the project, and was also very indecisive. So we kind of had to explain that you can't just put all of those bits and pieces into this house, because it's just going to look like kind of like a very bad version of a showroom,
A showroom,
right?
That's the word we use
It's
very
like
often.
you can't use this type of, like stone facade on the exterior, and then like wood cladding, and then like modern details.
Stone.
It's like, no. And if you were to do that, well, maybe a new construction would be a bit easier than a remodel, where you have to already deal with the existing portions, which in itself already has so much embedded into it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you do, sometimes how we've gotten over this with clients, particularly if it's interior architecture, like let's say if we're doing a kitchen, right? And someone comes back with like, oh, I want this color, or I want this, and it's something that I feel like, that's not a great fit. I have had success over the years with being like, fine, I'm going to show you what you want, right? And we'll 3D it and we'll put in what they want. And then next to it, we'll put what I want,
Yeah.
And 9 out of 10 times when it goes up on the screen and it's like, this is what you asked for, and next to it is what I think we should do, and here's why I think this is what we should do, I usually win. Not always, but I do think sometimes people they can't conceptualize, right? Something from this to this. They don't understand scale. They don't understand how that material or that thing they're asking for relates to everything else in the space. They just can't. That's why they're not doing our jobs, right?
Sure.
They can't visualize it. So I think sometimes saying, fine, let's show you what you're asking for. Let's see if you like it when you see it. I mean, if you put it up and they love it, okay, you're in trouble. But, I feel like sometimes
you are
and they're
in
like,
trouble.
oh, that's right. That doesn't really work.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think that's true. And most people, and this, of course, we're not blaming the clients because they aren't trained in this. They don't have the capacity, or for sure not nearly the capacity as the professionals to just visualize stuff. And I think putting it in front of them does help. It is funny, though, for that 1 out of 10 times where they love it, that's when as a designer or an architect, okay.
I may lose this one.
And I don't know how the rest of the project is going to go. We've had clients before who have had strong design backgrounds kind of earlier in their careers or in their education, and they just have what we call, they just have a good eye. And man, it makes the biggest difference in the world, because you show them stuff and they just get it. They're like, yep, that was the best one. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. That is the best one. We don't even have to have a conversation about it. And they don't need to see, in some cases, it makes our work actually go a lot faster, because we don't have to produce all this kind of counter evidence, or however you would describe it.
Exactly. Yeah, it does. It certainly helps if clients have good taste, one way or another, whether it's that, they're into art, or they're into fashion, or, even film, right? People who I feel like are big film buffs and really sort of study the set design and film. It's like they get it on some level, but there's a lot of people who really don't. And then I hope, and I'm sure you hope, that in the end, they trust us as the professionals, right? It's like, I'm not going to go to my accountant and start nitpicking how they do a spreadsheet or why they do it this way. And so, sometimes when I hit that resistance from a client, that's the conversation I'll try to have too, is say, hey, look, you hired me for a reason, right? I'm the professional at this. I've been doing this for 20 years. If you are going to hire me and you're going to work with me, it would be great if you had some trust in what I'm telling you, and, belief that I know the right decision here, the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's also this interesting and fine line between a client who is very invested in the project, which can be very powerful in a positive sense, but there is also kind of a threshold where sometimes if they get too involved, it's actually to the detriment of the project. But so one question with that, I guess, or in general, is what do you look for in, let's say, the ideal client or project that you're going to take on?
So ideal client, I would say I like people that do have a style direction in mind. I often find it hard when you get people who have no idea, not to say I couldn't prescribe it. And if they're open to that, that's fine. But I find sometimes people that have no idea also have a very hard time making decisions and getting there, or it takes a lot of whacking in the weeds to sort of figure out where we're going. So I do like people that, come out of the gate with some sense of what they like and what they don't like and are able to express that however that is, visually, however. I tend to like clients who are good at what they do and they understand that there's value in working with someone else who is good at what they do. So they hopefully respect me not only as a person, but as a designer, and that they have some trust, a level of trust that I know what I'm doing. And so they can focus on their job and let me focus on my job. Beyond that, I like people who have realistic expectations around time and money, which I'm sure in our industry is often very difficult, that people don't really have a concept of how long it takes to get through the design work required for something, how long permitting might take, how long construction might take. And, realities around costs, right? And it's, unfortunately, we do see people quite a bit who sort of want the pie in the sky, like they want the Ferrari, but they're on a Toyota budget. And it's very difficult. It's like I always say, I wish I had a magic wand and I could make this happen for you the way you want it to, but there are realities of what construction costs, and I'm not a miracle worker. So I think people who either get it coming in or at least are willing to listen to the realities about time and money, because I find if people have very unrealistic expectations going into a project, then it's just going to be an uphill climb the whole way.
Yeah, I completely agree. We, vetting clients is a big part of what I think any person who owns a design or architecture office has to do. And having those realistic expectations is one of the number one priorities, aside from also personality fit, because if similar to hiring a person, if they have all the other stuff, but I get the sense that we are not the right fit and they're going to be difficult to work with based on who we are, then we just won't do it. Because, the other thing too is that people maybe don't think about this when they are on the client side at the beginning, is that you were potentially signing on to work with this person for at least a year, probably more than a year, 1 to 5 years. And it could very well be the longest and most complex project the client has ever been involved with, period, on its own. And so anyway, that's just a way to say that for us, vetting clients is very, very important.
Well, and you can produce your best creative work if you feel like it's becoming work in a way, right? Like if you don't have that good relationship and you're afraid you're not going to pitch the right thing, or the client's being difficult, it's tormenting your brain, and therefore you can create at your best.
Yeah, it's very true. If they're unpleasant, for me, and I've had a couple over the years, who did turn out to be, unfortunately, just sort of unpleasant people, it really casts a pall over the whole project. And it is very hard to bring your best self creatively, right? You sort of reach the point of like, well, this person is not nice and doesn't appreciate what I'm doing, so why would I bother to try to do my best? Right. I mean, I hate to say that. I always try to bring my best, but you're right. It's hard to bring it creatively and do your absolute best if someone isn't, at least like somewhat appreciative and respectful of that.
And I think this probably applies to any industry, but it is fascinating because we speak to a lot of architects, obviously, and designers, that everyone, both of those people have the same opinion of what we just described. It's not worth it. And I think everyone goes through, a few of them sneak through because but it happens like once or twice. And then after that point, you're like, I'm not doing that again. I will do everything I can to avoid that, because it's not good for anybody.
No, mentally, it's so difficult. My husband once said to me, I don't understand, like, because I had this one difficult client and I relayed the whole thing. And he said, can't you tell when you meet these people? And I said, look,
No.
anyone can act sane for an hour,
Yeah, yeah,
which
exactly.
often is how long I meet people before they sign a contract and we're off, though I have over the years gotten much, much better at asking the right questions and probing a little more and really, like I think you brought up spidey sense, right? Sort of letting my spidey sense on, like, what kind of person does this seem like? Because you're right. If I am going to be dealing with them for years, I want to make sure it's someone that I'm going to be able to get along with and work well with.
Tied into this too, I think one of the interesting, differences between most clients and then most professionals is that the professionals or the architects, designers, and even the contractors to a degree, like we're always trying to gain as much information from the client as possible up front before we sign the contract or before we start any work for sure. And oftentimes the amount of information we want is far, far, far greater than what the client thinks they need to provide, which is an understandable difference because they don't do what we do. But
Right.
like, I want to know not just the budget, schedule, and scope. I want to know who they are, their goals, their sensitivities. I want to know everything. And sometimes that can be a lot of that can be achieved in a concise period of time if the client has kind of done their homework and they have all their ducks in a row. But a lot of times, honestly, I would say it would take like 2 to 3 meetings for us to actually get that information, which in a lot of cases is not feasible. Someone doesn't want to meet with you 3 times for 1.5 hours each time before you decide you're going to work with them. Like, it doesn't work that way sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And, it does help, obviously, if there are other people already on the project. So I do benefit sometimes, right, from if the architects are there before me, I will call the architect, right, and just kind of say, how's it going? What's this client like? How's it been so far? And try to get an honest assessment of sort of what the client is like. So I occasionally get lucky and, there's the architects there before me and I get a little intel on what I'm potentially walking into. And I still remember I had a call with Steven Sutro once about a client, and I remember him saying, and I don't think it's giving anything away because he has a lot of clients, so I'm sure they won't know who they are, but he said something along the lines of, if I had to rate a client on a 1 to 10 scale, this one would be like a 2 or a 3. And I was like, okay, I'm going to pass. Still would love to work with you someday, but this is not the project.
And he's like, why are you passing this project? Well,
oh, he was more or less warning me, like,
yeah. No, that's for sure the case. It just makes sense, again, for everybody involved, including the client. On the subject of collaborating and working with architects and contractors and everyone else, I want to know, how do you approach it? What's your ideal collaboration team scenario? And also, do you prefer to be brought on a project from the very, very beginning as opposed to, let's say, the architects, as we've seen sometimes, they get through all the, quote, architecture or the exterior stuff and they have a floor plan and they're like, okay, now we need an interior designer, come in and like, do your thing. Which I disagree with, by the way.
Good. I'm glad you disagree. So do I. So let's see. When I prefer to come on the project, definitely from the get-go. And I will always tell clients that the best projects result in building the team upfront from go. I think the best projects we've ever done have been ones where we and the architect are hired more or less simultaneously and even ground up, develop the house together. There's just different aspects of the way that we work. The way architects look at things and the way that we look at things are different. And I feel like having all those eyes on and a collaborative process between us and the client, and I often also advocate for bringing on a contractor and under a pre-con agreement as well, I feel like really results in the most linear process and the best product, having all of us work together as a team. So that is always my preference. We, of course, do get jobs where, yes, maybe it's already to a permit set and, oh, now we have to pick finishes. Okay, now we need the designer. And those can be more challenging because sometimes I look at the plans and it's like, ooh, I would have maybe done this differently. Or, I've even had ones where I've delved in with a client and said, why is the kitchen laid out this way? And I might have done it this way. And they're like, yeah, well, we don't like the kitchen. We don't know why it was drawn that way. And it's like, okay, and then we're sort of redesigning things. So like some communication breakdown sometimes happens in there. And, then we end up sort of like finessing a bunch of things. And I would rather just get it right the first time. So,
Totally.
yeah. And then, sorry, what was the first question? I know that was a two-parter. What was the
I
first part
forget
of the
the
question?
first question, but picking up on what you just said, I agree with entirely, and we have seen those cases ourselves too, and it's an interesting thing. So the specific example of a client gets partway through sometimes really far into a project, and then a new person comes on, the architect or designer or somebody, and they tell that person, guess what? I don't like this at all, actually, and from our perspective, we kind of scratch our heads like, how did you? Well, if you don't like it, then why is it here and why has it been in the
Right.
project this way for so
Right.
long? But
Right.
I've seen it enough times now where it's not just a one-off kind of oddball scenario. It happens more often than I would have
Hmm.
previously thought. And what that means, I don't know. I have guesses as to why it occurs, but I guess I guess what I'm saying sort of is that for any clients, if you don't like something, you should always
Speak
say
up.
that you don't like it. But I think also usually in those situations, there's a underlying and deeper rift that's taking place between the client and that professional, where they
Hmm.
decided not to tell that person subconsciously or consciously, and that's usually indicative of other problems in the project as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. And I've definitely seen it multiple times, like you. And I agree that there are so many times where I think, how did this get this far, right? Without someone saying, stop, I don't like that. Let's change this. And I don't know if it's, fatigue or just sort of lack of confidence on the client's part about speaking their mind about what they
mm,
want, but it does happen quite a bit. And that causes delays, right? For whatever reason, then we're back into redesigning things or we're reselecting materials for the exterior. I had one in Tahoe where the client told me when we got hired that they didn't like anything on the outside of the building and asked us to reselect it, right? And, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, and I called the architect and luckily, they're great and we work with them quite a bit. And I was like, hey, I just got to tell you, this is what the client said. And I'm not sure how you got to this point, and he's like, look, we've tried and tried and tried, and we can't seem to figure out what this client wants. So if you guys want to take a crack at it, have at it.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
we've tried
yeah,
and we can't get there.
yeah,
And so yeah, collaboratively we got there. But that is the kind of thing where I'm like, how a year in is this that you're telling me that you do not
Yeah.
like the any of the cladding on the exterior of the building,
yeah. It's hard too because I mean I do think it's incumbent on the professional to also convey a sense of openness so the client feels comfortable saying what they want to
Mhm.
say. But even
Mhm.
if that takes place, I mean, I think part of it too is these projects, it's hard. It's hard. They're complicated. There's just a lot of pieces and I don't know, odd things happen like this. Um, I was wondering when you are working with an architect, in particular when you're brought on at a later phase, if there's ever a challenge because of essentially ego, that someone's feelings are being hurt because now we have this new person coming in, or maybe even if you're at the part of the project from the beginning, this other person who I maybe have not worked with, I don't know, and they're offering their opinions to us or the client, and just kind of some friction takes place because of that.
Yeah, I have a good story, and I guess I can relay it because I'm pretty sure this architect does not like me, and we will not be working together. So, this is a client. This is actually quite recent. It was probably a year ago. The client approached us. They already had the architectural set was fairly progressed. It was getting close to permit set level. We took a look at it, and it was one where I felt like, okay, given all the conversations that we have had with the client about their desires, there are a lot of things I'm seeing that are not meshing with what I'm hearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
These people want to have children. The bedrooms are way on one end of the house, the laundry's on the other. But hey, there's this big closet right by the bedroom that would make a great stacked washer dryer laundry near the children's bedrooms. Just certain practical things.
Mm.
Husband and wife both work from home. She's a high powered tech exec. The architect had put her office through the laundry mudroom. She had to go through the
What?
laundry mudroom to get to her office in the home, whereas his office was this much more like premier,
Okay.
And
Mm.
I was like, there just seems to be some things that are a little off. So I said, would it be okay with you if, if we talk to the architect and, have some suggestions? And she's like, great. Yeah, there's some things that I'm not happy about. And, so we kind of went through his set and we had some suggestions. And I think we kind of like redlined over parts of it for kind of like, let's explain what we're seeing and what we're thinking, how these spaces could be a little bit different. And, so got on a Zoom with him and the client and kind of talked it through. And he was, I would describe it as apoplectic. I mean, like stammering, spitting, turning red.
Oh
was
my.
Wow.
really angry. And the client was like, well, I like all these things. These are all good suggestions. Like, I don't know why we didn't have them in the first place, but I like them. And he was more or less like, how dare you?
Yeah.
It's just your job to pick the tile. And it was like, I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I've been in a lot of remodels. I have a sense of space and I'm very aligned with your client. Like, whereas I think maybe he was quite a bit older, maybe doesn't have children, maybe didn't really understand her life and her lifestyle and what I was hearing. So, it was so bad. I think at least 4 or 5 times during the Zoom, he announced, I've been doing this for 40 years.
Anyone who starts proclaiming they've been doing things for decades, you can shut the fuck up.
If you've been doing things wrong for 40 years,
sorry to
doesn't
swear,
mean
but
anything.
honestly, anytime there's an architect, whoever, a contractor is like, I've been doing it for so-and-so, I'm like, I don't care, man. I do not
my
care.
reaction was, I can tell. And it looks like you drew this set like in the 90s for a woman who was a stay-at-home mother. Like, this is not, you are not understanding our client here. And let's be respectful. Like, we're both professionals in our industry. I could go off. I've been doing this for 20 years, whatever. But like, ultimately what we should both want is what our client wants and what is the right thing for our client. It's not about you and your ego, but this guy clearly had this monster ego and could not believe that I would ever dare to suggest these things. And, was just so rude that literally at the end of the Zoom, the client looked at me and she's like, I'm going to fire him. And she did.
Yeah.
And then I got to bring in an architect that I liked.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It worked out for the best for everyone. Thank you. And you know who you are if you ever listen to this podcast. Going apoplectic, insisting how long you've been doing this and refusing to listen to anyone's suggestions because we turned out all the better for it.
Well, it's an interesting, there's a lot of stuff to unpack with all of this. But one thing specifically is it tends to be the people who have to start claiming that they've done things for so long. Usually it means that they have been, yes, but they've been doing the same thing over and over for that time. Like 90% of the time, that's the case when people start saying stuff like that.
Exactly. And his architecture, I mean, not just to talk about the interiors, but I would say the same of the exterior. I mean, I took one look at the exterior elevation, was like, oh, this thing is a hot mess. And it looks like somebody who's, been drawing kind of variations on a theme for 20 years. And in fact, I swear half the CAD module literally looked like he must have taken blocks from other projects and just like assembled them together. It was just like, what is this? So, that is not a selling point for me. If you've been doing this for 40 years, I expect you to still be doing cutting edge work and draw something impressive. And that's not what that was. So,
yeah, for sure. At the very least, be a bit more professional and
polite, professional, perhaps respectful of someone who also works in your industry and has some ideas.
And you're right. I mean, for us, we always tell that to clients. We're always like, we don't have an ego. We don't really care where the best ideas come from as long as it makes it into the project. So I think, if we each start to like pointing fingers at each other and have a relationship that's more of a fighting relationship rather than a collaborative one, then the project is going to suffer and it's going to reflect that.
When you think about it, even in the office, it doesn't make sense. It's not like all the ideas come from one person. That's not the case. I mean, unless you run your office that way, not you, but whoever. But generally, no, it's a collaborative effort, even within the office. So why would it matter if someone else comes up with it?
Exactly. Now, that was my reaction was, if we're going to work on this project together, we need to work as a team, right? And that's always my attitude is the best suggestion wins. And the architects I like to work with, if I have a suggestion, that's architectural related, they're open to hearing it. And if they have a suggestion about the interiors, I'm open to hearing it because like you, I just want the best project that I can possibly be a part of. And so whose idea it is, I don't really care, best idea wins. And that's, thank God I didn't have to work with that guy. And I think I actually told the client too, like, well, thank God you're going to fire him because I can't work with someone like that. Sure. I won't. I've been doing this too long. I have a lot of work.
Yeah.
Just not going to work on a job with someone like that. It'd be a miserable experience. I don't want to have to fight this guy's ego every step of the way. So I'm like you. I like a collaborative, open-minded, respectful process.
And the smart clients get it too, because we actually have had clients who fire the previous architect / contractor or whoever it is. Because if they're intelligent clients, they get it. They're like, why is that guy saying that stuff? It's weird. Why is he behaving this way, or she?
Yeah.
Why are they behaving this way? I don't want that. And I think soon they start to realize, okay, well, now I have this other person who's talking sense, yes, but also they seem like they're nice people and they're being cordial and helpful. And I have this other person who's being a stick in the mud. Why would I keep you around?
I know.
Why would I keep you around? I do also think that some of the rifts that take place between designers and architects and inter-designers and architects is generally a generational thing. I do think that I know that there are a lot of older architects who are very, frankly, just grumpy. And honestly, sometimes for good reason, because it's a tough profession and it takes a lot more than skill and talent to become successful in it, for sure. But they're kind of grumpy people. That's like the profile of architects generally anyway, as a stereotype. And they don't like the idea after X decades of years of battling to then now have this other person who's going to tell them to do something differently. And I think honestly, that's a lot of it. It's just
and oftentimes
architects
work with the stuff that's not so fun. When maybe interior designers get to do more of like the pretty, fun things that you see. So I could see how, maybe in 30 years we get grumpy too.
30 years of building
They're
codes.
old and angry and jealous.
The permitting process, have made marks over them for years.
Too many permitting red lines have taken
Right. They've been trampled by like design review committees and, permitting in San Francisco, and they're just like, they're over it, right? They're done. But no, I get it. And I think you're right. I do feel like the ones where I've had the most difficulty have been architects that are significantly older than I am. And, funny enough, I talked to another one recently about a project here in San Francisco that we were considering. As I said, I talked to the client, and then before taking the job, I said, great, I'd love to talk to your architect. And, I said, how are we going to work together? What program are you working in? What software are you in? We work in CAD, we work in Revit. What do you prefer? Happy to collaborate however you want. We can work in BIM 360 and share the model in the cloud, And he was like, oh, well, you won't be touching the set. You're just picking things. He's like, you could make me a Pinterest board of the things that you like. And I was like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not going to make you a Pinterest board. I'm going to select everything and document it in Folio for you. And the contractor. And so it was kind of interesting. It was clearly, he was just like, oh no, you're over there with your pretty pictures and you can send me your pretty pictures and then I'll draw it. And it was like, that's not how I work. Now that said, I have worked with architects who do own the set. I mean, we did a large ground up with Carney Logan Burke in Wyoming, and they definitely wanted to own the full set, which was fine, and then for us, we just kind of did everything in SKs or, quick elevations to sort of express to them what we wanted and where we saw the materials going and terminations and all of that, and provided it to them. And then they, either rolled it into their set or they redrew it into their set. So, I mean, we can do that, right? But it's, that implication that like, somehow I'm not capable of drawing anything or understanding how things are made, and that I should just provide like a picture. I mean, I don't know who he's worked with, and I know, no disrespect to my fellow colleagues, there are definitely designers here and everywhere else, right, who cannot draw, who do not really understand how things get built, and who do just kind of make pretty, and sometimes it turns out great. It's just not, it's just not how I work.
Yeah. That's also a really good point, because I do think that this is not to excuse architects who are going to be rude to other professionals, but I do think one of the difficulties with the design and inter-design space is that there's just a huge variety of in terms of how people practice. And the same thing goes for architecture, frankly, which like astonishes me sometimes. The drawings I've seen, I'm like, what is this? Like, how are you even practicing right now? How are you getting hired? Like, whoa. But anyway, so in interior design, that you do have people, as you described, who operate more like, here's a reference image and it's going to look like that. So I'm just going to tell my cabinet maker who I know, make something that looks like this, and I'm going to select stuff from Rejuvenation Hardware or whatever they're going to do, and that's how they go about doing it. And I think it produces also for other professionals, like actually for us, like when we are talking with an interior designer, I have no idea on the spectrum where they are really, unless we have a conversation, start to say, okay, like you said, let's break down how we're going to work. How do you work? So we can see how we're going to, interface with each other. And that interfacing sometimes is difficult when the other person is, frankly, in my view, just very casual about documentation and everything else. It's I don't know how to.
Well, I think it also comes from the fact that, with, again, my biggest pet peeve is HGTV, which just ruins both of our profession.
Yes.
Where basically, like you could have a bunch of housewives who have nothing else to do but picking out cushions for their sofa, become and call themselves interior designers. And that's an issue for both of our profession, where it just creates the wrong idea of how we all work and operate.
Well, the seriousness of it too.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, to me, it's maybe the difference between a decorator and a designer, right? And I think there are some people in the industry who own the title decorator, right? Like they're very clear that like they do not do drawings, right? If they're brought in on a project, they're like, I need an architect. I don't draw millwork. I don't draw molding details. I don't do this. I pick pretty surfaces and finishes. And if they're honest about that, that's great. I think there are a lot of people out there who call themselves interior designers who really are not. They're really decorators. And, and I do think it creates a lot of frustration. I see, or I have heard frustration from architects and particularly builders. A lot of the builders I know.
Yeah.
The running joke is that, the contractors all hate designers. Why do they hate designers? And when you talk to them about this, they're like, because we get these people who literally draw things that are like half-assed and actually can't be built, or like don't fit on the wall because they didn't measure it right, or, or they didn't draw anything at all. And literally, you're right, like show up with a picture and are like, make it look like this, or don't document things well or correctly, and that cause delays in construction, or, cause problems with sourcing and picking things that cannot be procured within the construction timeline. So I just think there's a huge difference between people who, have that skill set and understand how important these things are, because in the end, it all comes down to time and money. Like, do we want a beautiful end product? Yes. Do you also need to document things appropriately, hand them over on time, source and select things that can get to the project within the timeline? Yes. And I do know that there's a lot of designers that don't, lack the level of discipline, organization, know-how, whatever it takes to do that.
Yeah. And I think that I call it the high-end tier or level, that level of documentation and the things you described, that's how you get to that end result. It doesn't happen by being, again, casual or loose about it. You have to consider also for some of these projects, again, it's a year, 1, 2, 3. You can't have a 3-year-long process and be that loose about things. It's an odd thing, because I feel like a lot of the design and construction process and architecture process is really about spending the appropriate amount of time and money up front to save time and money later and to get a better quality. That's really the whole game. And a lot of folks maybe don't quite understand that, or clients who are new clients to a project think, well, we could probably get away with not actually spending that time and money up front for whatever this thing is, and it'll be okay. And we always tell them, look, every client thinks that they're the special one who's going to pull that golden ticket and be the one who makes it to the chocolate factory without putting any of their work. I'm like, it ain't going to happen. Yeah,
don't try to game the system. It's not going to work.
Don't try. I mean, and there's thousands of professionals who would tell you the same thing. And if we're all saying the same thing, it's probably for a good reason, because we've seen it.
Exactly. Yeah, we had one recently where, they were in the attempt to save money. He kind of said to me, well, for the construction set, couldn't you just draw parts of it? Like, the parts we really care about, like the kitchen and the primary bathroom. And I was like, how is the builder going to build the rest of it? Yeah. I mean, there's a floor plan, but that certainly doesn't tell him in the other bathrooms, like, well, how high should the sconce be? Yeah. What does the face of the vanity that they're supposed to build look like if no one draws it? Like, this isn't how this works, And in the end, it's just going to cost you more time and money, because the contractor is going to come back to me or you and say, what is this vanity supposed to look like? Great. How tall is it supposed to be? Okay, where's the sconce supposed to go? Where do you want your toilet paper holder? All of these things, like, you don't elevate it. There's nothing for them to go on. So either they're going to make it up and you're going to get what you're going to get, which you may not like, or they're going to chase us all around with a bunch of questions, and you're going to end up spending twice as much time as you would have to have us draw it and document it correctly up front.
No, totally. And again, at a certain tier, these kinds of contractors, they don't want to go through that process, and they'll turn down projects. They'll be like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be your contractor if you don't have a full CD set.
Right.
I'm not going to be your contractor if you're going to, limit the involvement of the architect through construction and not have them do CA. All of these things. And so it tends to be the right people gravitate toward the right people in terms of the professionals, at least, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's cutting out CA is always a big mistake, and it is something I see clients, they're hitting the pain point, right? So I get where the thought process comes in, where they're sort of watching money bleed out. And I always try to explain this to clients too, that, there's a wave in which like our fees go, and there's a wave in which the construction fees go. And I get it that people tend to hit this point. And I don't know if you've seen this, but prior to close-in, always seems to be the valley of death, right? In a construction
the
where
valley of death.
There's like, it feels like you've been in it forever.
Yeah.
There's been wires and pipes hanging out of the walls forever. Like, why is this dragging on so long? And the money's bleeding out. And, they start to get just like, fatigue, and it doesn't look like anything, and they get bummed. And, and I that's kind of often where I see the pivot point where clients really start to like get super bummed out, and start to try to cut things out, like, no, let's start axing this, or we don't need CA, or we don't need OADC meetings every 2 weeks. Let's just meet once a month. They start trying to do these kind of scattershot things that, in my opinion, are very unwise. It's like keeping your OADC meetings, keeping the architect engaged, keeping the designer engaged throughout the process ensures the best product in the end, and cutting those people out does not save money. It does not. And, and it's funny. And I always tell clients when this happens, because it does a lot, kind of hang in there when the drywall goes on.
Yeah.
We'll turn the corner. You'll walk in and be like, it looks like a room, and it's like,
it looks like a room. I have a room.
Like they can conceptualize it, and then pretty soon the finishes start going on. And then it's like pretty, happy. And, we kind of turn the corner. But I agree with you that it's, trying to cut minimal costs out of it by sidelining people in CA is never a good idea.
And we tell clients that pretty often, like our professional fee is probably the smallest fee out of the whole project. So really, if you're trying to save money and cutting corners, like our corner is really not one that should be cut, because it's not going to give you a whole lot.
Not a good idea, and I'll say to clients too, well, if the architect's out and or we're out, well, who's going to answer the questions, right?
Yeah,
so when there's an RFI from the builder, are you going to answer that? Yeah. Like, are you going to go over the shop drawings for your millwork and approve them by yourself without help?
No, that's a terrible idea. I mean, there are exceptional people who can manage things in different professions and be pretty good at it. But of course, as with most things, people who are not in the professions underestimate a lot of things, but just the time it takes to review the shop drawings as a specific example. It's really hard because the construction is stressful. A ton of money is being spent, and there's not really. It's an odd thing because I think with creating a house or creating a building, there's just not a lot you can do once you're going to just take. You can't take shortcuts for the quality's sake, but also it's not really going to help in the end. And frankly, also for most people, at least from what we've seen, when they have the money to do something really nice, when it comes down to the question of, okay, either you sacrifice this nice thing or you don't. And if you don't, what was I saying? If you don't, it's going to cost you more money. 99% of the time, they're like, no, I still want it. That's what it comes down to. And, but it is a long and complicated process, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And the time and money thing is always interesting. And I don't know your process on that, but we've started recently to try to do kind of more ROM budgeting, like rough order of magnitude for those not in the industry, earlier on, because it's so painful to go through those projects. And I'm sure you've had them as we have, where you get all the way through a permit set, everything's specified, you roll up a CD set, then you get the pricing, and the clients are like, this is $1 million more than I wanted to spend, and then you're going through a massive VE exercise, which is also costly. Yeah. So, we've really tried in the last few years on the projects that we're on to advocate for early, like way before the permit, kind of go in with a schematic set. And we have a set of placeholder specifications that we've created over time that I would say cover 80% of our projects in terms of realm of reality of like how much per faucet, how much per square foot of tile, how much for flooring, how much for carpet, what do we assume for wall finishes, right? Trim detail, like just some assumptions that get us into the realm of reality so that when we hand it to a builder, the ROM we get back is better, because I
Yes.
feel like without that, you know how it goes. If you don't have elevations and you don't have any specs, it's,
The builder
it's like,
can't, yeah, they don't know what to
throwing a
do.
spitball at the wall.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do, or they lowball, or they want the job, right? So they just throw an artificially low number at it, and then we're all caught out later on, like, oh, sweet, he gave me $3 a square foot for tile. What am I going to do now? So, trying to make sure that we're like in the realm of reality for the caliber of the project and for what the client desires. And I found it to be really useful because we have recently had a couple where it's like that comes back and it's higher than the clients want. It's like, okay, well, thank God we figured this out now before we had an entire permit set. Let's go back and figure this out, right? Either we're going to take square footage off, or we're going to dumb it down, or there's going to be something, but it's certainly better to do it early than late.
No, we're in total agreement, and that's precisely what we do. And it's interesting. So the way it works for us is that in the first conversations, there's a discussion about cost per square foot, which is a really horrible way to talk about things. And when there's nothing drawn, there's not a whole lot more you can do.
Right.
Use reference images and say, okay, this is like what you're going for. I can tell you it's going to be at least this much. Mm-hmm. And then at pretty much every phase of the project, either in the middle of the phases or at the end, we do an ROM of some kind. And it gets more, and it starts out very fuzzy, it gets more and more specific. Mm-hmm. And at some point, and honestly, it varies from project to project, but as soon as we can, we put together a pricing set that in many cases will have placeholder specs of some kind, materials and everything you said, and we give it to, hopefully there's a contractor who's performing proper pre-construction and say, okay, take a look at this. Because it just makes sense. And it kind of astonishes me that it wasn't until maybe the last 10, 15 years that this has started to become, I don't think it's the norm, but becoming more, at least I want to make it the norm, becoming more the norm. Was before it was, let's just get all the way through.
Get all the way through, and then we price it. And then surprise, right, when you are ready to start construction, then you'll find out what it's going to cost to build this. And so I'm glad to hear that you do it. I am amazed by how many architecture firms do not.
No, I don't want it in either way because it makes me nervous.
Me too.
And it's a waste of money too for the client's money. Like, why would we spend time, developing all the details for something we don't even know how much it's going to cost? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Why design something you can't afford to build? Ultimately. And the other thing I'm happy to hear is that you do have that cost per square foot discussion with clients up front. I find lots and lots of architects do not. And we often will get onto a project where it's like at permit set phase. And, sometimes I'll say to the client, like, oh, well, I'm sure you and the architect talked about cost per square foot. What were those conversations like? Oh, no, we haven't talked about that. And it's like, oh, okay. And I do remember one time asking an architect that I knew pretty well. I was like, I don't understand. I think it was actually because I literally sat in a meeting with this architect and heard them tell our client that they were going to build this house for I don't know what they said, $700 a square foot. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh no, this is like a $1,200 a square foot house, And I think I said to him later, I don't understand. Do you not know what the construction costs are? It's possible you don't, right? Maybe you're not that involved in CA and you don't really know at the end what the full cost was. Or are you kind of being misleading? And he more or less was like, if I really told people what it was going to cost, they probably would never do it. And it was like, ooh, that's not my approach, right? My approach is let's lay this on the table. Let's be honest about what the current construction costs are for the architectural style, the lot, is this a steep lot? Are we going to spend $250,000 digging and then another $250,000 on concrete? Let's talk about that, right? And I just don't want to get into something where people are going to be angry, disappointed, and you're right, Marina, waste money, right, on designing something that simply is not within the budget.
And our approach is always, we tell clients, as much as we love drawing things in the computer, our goal is to see it built. So if we agreed on a project, but we know it's going to cost them double, but we're not telling them that, then the project is probably never going to happen. And we're not interested to do, fantasy land type of architecture. That's not what we're into. But it's interesting to hear from you that you've noticed that architects don't mention the price per square foot, which to us doesn't make any sense. And even if we don't know it directly, we talk to contractors everywhere we work to get a sense of, in this specific location, what is the price per square foot for something of this quality.
Exactly.
And we notice more and more that clients have no idea of what things cost. We had a potential client who was showing us reference images of houses that are probably 15 to 20 million built, and he wanted to do his house for 300 square foot. And we're like, you know, same thing. Like we can, I always tell them, we can turn dirt into gold, like as much as we can be creative. Like there's just, you know, so much we can do. So setting the expectations on our front, I think it's crucial.
It's a weird thing with all this, with building, with the construction industry too, because with the level that you're going to be at in terms of construction quality or design quality, whatever that tier is, the cost is, it's kind of going to be what it's going to be. Like we can't, no one can, and the contractor says this too. It's like the contractors are like, I can't change the price of wood. I can try to find cheaper wood, but that doesn't really exist. I can't change the price of labor, and my profit a lot of times is a percentage of those things. So I don't really know what you want me to do. And I don't know. I wish things weren't so expensive, to be honest. It is crazy expensive now. It
is crazy expensive. I mean, particularly, you know, the markets that we're working in, right? I mean, you're Los Angeles and San Francisco, and we're San Francisco and Lake Tahoe. And, you know, it's funny because in Tahoe, we have the problem of a lot of Bay Area clients have this perception of like, oh, it's Tahoe. It's like a hinterland. It's going to be super cheap to build up there. And I'm like, it's actually more expensive to build in Tahoe now than it is to build in the Bay Area. And people are shocked by that, but it is true. And it is the labor market. It's not materials, right? Like to your point, lumber in the Bay Area and lumber in Tahoe are basically the same thing. You know, it's not that. It's not the materials. It's the labor costs. And it's a very tight labor market up there. It's a small area. The housing's very expensive. There's simply not enough labor. And it is shocking how high it is. You know, so there's some regional variations, but across the board, it is high, you know, and I would rather clients know that going in, and, you know, that we kind of start with, well, what is the ultimate budget? And let's design to that, you know, not go backwards and design something that we can't afford to build. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. There was something you mentioned earlier that I want to pick up on regarding floor plans specifically. Wow, these 2 hours like blew by super fast. That's crazy. We're at 12:45.
That's good.
I lost my train of thought now. I just wanted to comment and say that I think one of the differences between architects and interior designers or designers generally is I think that designers are much more open to being very intimate with a client and understanding their living patterns at a much finer grain level of detail. And therefore, when they create a floor plan, if they have that ability of interior architecture expertise, that floor plan is a much better fit for them. And I say that because I have seen, same as you, floor plans done by architects for clients, and then somehow we get brought on board. And the floor plan, first of all, employs a lot of very erroneous, just common sense things, like doors that don't open the right way, or doors that open but then hit the bed, like atrocious things. And then also stuff that doesn't make sense for the client. And the way we work, even if we're just doing the architecture portion of a house, is to understand the client like really, really, really deeply, especially for the floor plan and the program adjacencies and the things you were talking about earlier. And I do not understand why architects who specialize in residential don't do that. And they end up producing these floor plans like you described, that we've both seen. And I think
that don't meet the program.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, but I do think also that's maybe where designers are just much more willing to engage with the client at that level, when architects are a little bit more like hands off ish.
Yeah, and also, I mean, obviously, you have the concern that we don't, right? Of like, well, how does this reflect to the outside of the building? You know,
sure. Yeah, the's always that. Yeah.
You know, like I would really like a window over my bathroom saying, "Great, what does that look like from the outside?" You know, I don't have to worry about that. That's your job. But you know, yeah, the inside, you're right. I mean, we are in really deep with the clients. You know, in terms of how they live. And a lot of it is the questionnaire helps. And then there are lots of conversations as we're designing these spaces, like, you know, bathrooms. You know, I mean, we have one client in Tahoe that cracked me up because she was like, oh my God, my husband has like more hair supplies than any person on the planet. He needs like his own cabinet because he has so much hair stuff. The man does have great hair, you know, but I was like, okay, you know, so we like literally designed on his side of the bathroom, like his own cabinet for his hair products.
Awesome.
You know, just things like that, right? Sort of even in a couple, like, well, do you both go to bed at the same time?
Yep.
Do you get up at the same time? You know, for me, laying out like a primary suite, that's a huge conversation. Doing it right really involves kind of what are your lives like together, right? Is one person a night owl and one goes to bed early and one's up early? Well, then you probably want the one who's up early to be able to go in and use the bathroom and get dressed without waking the other person. So let's think about division, so that we're not having sound transfer, just all of those conversations. And it's a lot of, frankly, very intimate details about kind of how people live their lives and and what they value too. I feel like there's in floor plan, sure, it's kind of how do you live, how do you entertain, who comes over, who's part of your household, how do you cook, who cooks, who cleans up, are you cooking together alone, just all these conversations. And then, that level of detail also dovetails into the furnishings work too, because nobody has an unlimited budget. And so then there's always conversations around value and what you value. Do you want the most stunning chandelier anyone's ever seen in the entry hall, and that's what you really care about, and then we're going to save money elsewhere? Or is it that you want, the most amazing flex form sofa, because you really want something comfortable and you're willing to spend $50,000 for the most amazing sofa with the great fabric and, but other things like the rugs, well, I don't care about that. I have dogs. The dog's going to puke on it, so it's like kind of getting that, there's a lot of those conversations around sort of like, relative value that inform everything. Yeah.
No, totally. One of the things that we always try and do, it's not always possible, but is to tour the person's existing current residence with them. For sure, if it's a remodel, obviously you're going to go to the house. But even if it's going to be a new home, it's actually very, very helpful to see how they live. And there's this interesting, it's a way to get insights to all the things you mentioned, because I do find that finding out that information, it's really hard to do in, let's say, one session over lunch. Like it takes, and a lot of these things are learned throughout the project also anyway.
Right.
But being in someone's house just allows you a different point of access to these things. And it ends up being an interesting balance, I think, for all of us to try and create this new house, let's say, that is, is going to fit with them and how they're used to living, but also be a departure from that. Because whenever someone's doing a remodel, a new house, it's for like utility reasons, but it's also for potentially a lifestyle change. It's an advancement of some kind. And it's a big deal to build a house. It should be this new thing. And I think finding that balance is also, it's one of the kind of edges that we have to like constantly balance on to see when we are pushing the advancement in the right way versus too much.
Right. Versus you don't
way.
want them to be uncomfortable in their home, right? And that's something I always definitely consider on a project is kind of where is the line, right? Of sort of taking what's the client's comfort level, who are they, and expressing that in the best possible version, and then hopefully pushing the envelope a little bit, maybe out of their comfort level, but not so much that, I would never want to do a project where someone comes home and feels like, this isn't me. I don't feel comfortable here. I feel like I'm in a hotel, or it feels too fancy, or feels too precious, right? Like, those are things I don't want. And I think, for a lot of our clients, it's easy for me to have these conversations, maybe because not all of them, but a lot of them I have overlap in one way or another, right? Like I have 3 kids, I have 5 pets,
Oh my.
So a lot of the time, like the people I'm working with, they have kids and it's all about durability. Yep, I get that. I've been there, or we have 2 big dogs and, they want to climb on the couch and we need to have durable fabrics. And it's like, got that. I got 5 pets. Like, so I kind of get it. Like I've lived a lot of these things one way or another. So I have some personal experience that I think also helps inform that. Like my cats, I say road test everything for me. If they can't destroy it, it cannot be destroyed. So I definitely know like what can survive. My cats are like uber destroyers. And so they're terrible little beasties. But I now know like the very few things that they will not take apart.
That's funny.
So they're part of the team too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They're the R&D division, material testing.
My unpaid employees. I mean, I have gone as far as like when we're considering carpet for clients, taking it home like a sample and putting it down and being like, have at it, Lucy, let's see what you can do to this, and just
well, it passed the Lucy test, you should be good for at least 10 years.
Lucy can't destroy it, we're good.
It's funny.
My last question, because it is already the end, is who is your favorite designer, or do you have a favorite building or interior, something that just kind of like makes you feel something special?
Ooh, good question.
We usually ask that to architects, which maybe is easier because it's like a whole building, but
I don't know. It's a hard question.
It's a hard question. I mean, I'll say that I was in Paris in January for Maison et Objet and Deco Off. And so what popped into my head is the Musée d'Orsay,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which I just think is like, it's just breathtaking, and I love that like the clock is still there and that it's this repurposed, right, building. Um, but just beautiful, breathtaking, beautiful use of light, space. So hard to pick one.
No,
That is a good
it's a
one,
good
though.
one, and
That's
it's
a
an
great one.
interesting building because it has the juxtaposition of the old and the new part in the way that the interior exhibition is laid out. It's a much more contemporary way, but the way the facade and the structure is an older building. So
Yeah, historic.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I did just tour Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin West.
Oh, did you
yeah.
really? So did we.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh,
just
yeah.
the last month
Last
or
month?
so ago, yeah.
Oh gosh, we were there almost the same time. I think I was there like 2 weeks ago.
Awesome.
oh wow.
And I had not seen it before, and I am a Frank Lloyd Wright fan. And to me, one of my favorite things is always touring a home or a studio or some space that is an architect's own.
Interesting.
Because there's the work you do for others, and then there's the work you do for yourself. And because that was his home in the wintertime, for many years, 20 years, seeing what he built when it was for himself, for his personal use, for the use of the students and the staff, I found that really fascinating and really just had such a great sense of place and light. And yeah, what did you think of it? I'm curious to hear.
Oh, I was going to ask you, what did you think of the lounge? I thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, the story behind it is also just incredible. But I think also we were reflecting on it, I think on the show actually, Battalias and West, that it was very much a design build project. And I think things back in the day with Wright were much more that way anyway. And I was speculating and wondering, I don't know if something quite as intricate could be done without a design build approach. And also the fact that it was Frank Lloyd Wright.
Well, he was
Right.
experimenting a lot of things.
Yeah, experimenting,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, in a way, it was kind of imperfect and not always, like incredible in the detail of the execution, but he was onto something.
Yeah, the fact that it started out as a camp, I found that fascinating,
Yeah.
that it was meant to be sort of temporary, right? And that there wasn't glass in it originally, and
Yep.
it was really that camp mentality. And then you're right, it evolved over time, and I suppose they also had the luxury of spending that much time in that place, to get
Yeah.
a really deep understanding of, the light, the space, weather, cloud movements. I mean, all of those things that's kind of a luxury that it's rare to have, right, when you're designing something. But yeah, it was fantastic to see.
No, that's a very good point. The lounge, I think it was the lounge or the living room, the space that
room.
had the fireplace and the piano. That was a
Yep.
great space.
Yeah.
Love that space.
That was a great space. I liked his studio too, his studio office that had kind of the huge rock fireplace. They clearly had kind of, I don't know if that rock was there or they put the rock in
Yeah.
working around those details. I, of course, was looking at it thinking like, I bet this leaks. But
It 100% does.
Let's
yeah, to your point, I'm like, it doesn't look super well built.
No.
But
No, and they're undergoing a lot of kind of tests and questions to try and figure out how to solve some of these issues so they can keep it around and not have it just fall
maintain it over
apart.
time.
We visited
Yeah.
Falling Water a few years ago, and I think someone mentioned all the leaks that was going through the windows. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
Well, it was done like 100 years ago.
Yeah,
so-
It was, old places leak. I should know. I've owned a bunch of them. It happens.
Holly, this was fantastic. I think this was it went by the quickest of probably all the recordings we've ever done, which is a good sign. Thanks so much for making the time, and let's continue the chat.
Thank you, David and Marina. This was so much fun. I really love talking with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.